Today, I'm going to break down the May 11th updates to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament policy and review some of the ones that you should already know, but probably don't, because let's face it, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, they're not the best at reading cards. They barely even read a paragraph on the card, so do you really expect them to read a 66-page document? That, and we're going to go over the reference code of conduct. I just hope that this read will help deter some people from doing something stupid in the future and getting slammed. Judges probably won't take pity on you just because you didn't know. It's like going to a foreign country and breaking the law there. Oh, I didn't know. Now you get a get out of jail free card. You know, that's not how it works. Now, before I get into this, I have to start this by saying this is my breakdown and interpretation of said document. You know, I do not act as the final interpretation. Everything said only represents my view and does not represent Konami's view. If anything aligns, it's just a coincidence. And, okay, with that said, here we go. So you may have noticed that, hey Tom, your hair is different and your shirt's also different. That's because I recorded this entire video with the mic off. Yeah, that really sucked. It was a great 3 hours, but we're going to get through this anyways. Here's the TOC. We're going to go over the judges. We're going to go over media and fan-created content, duelist responsibility, tournament play, and the code of conduct that's available online that relates to a lot of these topics. In some areas, I'm just going to talk about the changes. The other areas, I will elaborate on because I think it's important to review it, and it might break some of the existing misconception. And you know what? The overall tone of this seems to make things a bit more clear and a bit more strict of, you know, what we can and cannot do. And that's actually going to be talked about in the judge area, which we're talking about right now. First section, judges. So what does a head judge do and what are the changes? So, well, if you guys don't know what a head judge does, they are the one that oversees the tournament and runs the judge staff. They have the typical responsibility of answering the final call for appeals regarding gameplay ruling as well as policy. They have the final say, not even the TO, not even the event manager. They are in charge of how things are run. So what are the changes? Well, there's been a lot of clarifications made about what a head judge can and cannot do. And the first one here is pretty much saying that, oh, we're going to be a lot more strict now. Head judges cannot make decisions that would otherwise override or conflict with the official tournament policy, the official rulebook, tournament-specific operations, documents, etc. So what does it mean? Well, from the past, there have been head judges that made things a little bit more convenient for the players or the head judges to kind of rule on. You know, it's easier to maintain game state, but it would allow people to kind of go against the policy and use certain tournament materials that were not allowed, like using dies for, you know, zone blocking and stuff like that. And that's not something that they should allow because it's against policy. And, you know, they do exist, and that's why this is here to make it a lot more specific, saying, hey, you can't do that, and you should not do that. So what it really means in the future, you're less likely gonna get the leniency. So aside from like tournament materials, you might get head judges that will basically say, hey, you know, for you runic players, you guys are all gonna have to play according to the rules, so you better declare your battle phases if you're going to skip them, because they're no longer going to be assumed skip, because that kind of goes against the rule book, and we don't want to go against it. We want to play as official as possible, and, you know, reward players that are skillful enough to play according to the rules. The second thing that they clarified on head judges is one of their powers, which is only the head judge may disqualify people from a sanctioned event. However, disqualifying someone does not mean suspending them. That is actually not their responsibility. The head judge, tournament organizer, event manager, no one can suspend people from sanctioned official KDE US events except for the KDE penalty committee. The penalty committee are the only people that may suspend people from events. So a head judge more or less can DQ you and kind of boot you out. I think that's within his power, but they cannot suspend you for future play. Usually what happens when someone gets DQ'd is that they have to fill up a form. There's maybe like witness forms, and they basically submit all of these forms as like a case, and then that gets reviewed by the penalty committee. There is a procedure to this, but it's not the head judge's power. So yeah, they're just making that clear that it's not the head judge that is suspending you, it is the penalty committee that is suspending you. And the last little bit is about clarifying on assistant head judge cannot overrule the head judge if both the assistant head judge and the head judge are handling the appeals. Okay, that part, I guess maybe there was a power struggle between a head judge and assistant head judge at some point, and they're just making it clear that, you know, the head judge still has the final say. And a section for the assistant head judge and the public events lead essentially is telling you guys, hey, they share responsibilities of the head judge, such as handling the appeals, and there's other responsibilities such as delegating tasks to a lot of the leads and other floor judges. The updates to the floor judges, they added elaborate examples on questions that should be answered and should not be answered. They kind of split it into two parts, and I actually kind of go into some of these examples, but this is a bit of a learning curve for a lot of the judges out there. Some people don't answer the questions that they should have answered, and therefore led to an illegal game state and punished the player on the spot, but you also did not answer their question, which led to it, and it would be really weird if they try to appeal you because you kind of led them down a path which would lead to an illegal play. And the other ones would be like they answer questions that they should not have answered and revealed information and kind of look like they were coaching the other player, both of which are really bad, and I love the examples that they give. Example number 1, on a question that should be answered, Duelist A has a Beatrice on the field that's been affected by an infinite impermanence. Duelist B has 3 or more spells in the graveyard, and Duelist B in the main phase calls for a judge to show a card in their hand to ask, if they would be able to take control of Beatrice with this card in their hand, a Sky Striker Widow Anchor. And without revealing, to the other player that it's a Widow Anchor, a judge should inform the Duelist B that the activation of that card would be illegal. This is protecting the game state. This is not coaching, especially when it comes to like some of the stuff regarding legality. Okay, and I love the mirror example of this. The mirror example is that Duelist A has that same Beatrice on the field. However, this time Duelist B has a set infinite impermanence and a Widow Anchor in hand. There's 3 or more spell cards in the graveyard. Duelist B, it is currently their turn, and Duelist A activates their effect on Beatrice. Okay, that's within their effects. That's a quick effect. Duelist B calls for a judge and shows them a card in question, which would be that Widow Anchor, and then decides to ask the question if she would be able to use the Widow Anchor on the Beatrice after the infinite impermanence resolves. And so, without informing Duelist A of the cards in question, the Imperm and the other one, the judge should inform Duelist B that they cannot answer this because it could influence their decision and therefore it is considered coaching. Because here's the key thing that is different here. The infinite impermanence has not been activated yet. It is a hypothetical. And therefore, you can't ask layered questions like this. Oh, after I imperm this, what would this card still be able to do something? Now you're going into learning about certain ruling interaction, but right now that stuff is hypothetical. I can't really answer it until you kind of get to it. And even if you activate cards at this very moment, well, guess what? It's not going to create an illegal game state. Once again, judges can't answer stuff that are hypothetical. They got to do stuff that's mainly aimed towards protecting the game state from getting into an illegal game state. The second example is actually quite clever because you don't answer the person directly. Duelist A has a Gozen Match and a Thunder Dragon Titan, and Duelist B has a Sky Striker Ace Kagari that probably wants to turn into a different monster, and there's also a Sky Striker Maneuver Afterburners with 3 spell cards in the graveyard, so it can pop a spell or trap card if it successfully destroys a card. Now Duelist B, calls a judge, shows a card in hand. If I use this on his monster and it doesn't get destroyed, will I still be able to destroy 1 spell or trap card on the field? And here's an interesting thing, because if you don't answer this question and they attempt to do something that leads to them doing something illegal because it didn't happen, then they would get penalized and you didn't answer the question. So, this one is kind of an interesting one because you're still trying to protect the game state here, but without revealing the cards in question or giving them a yes or no answer, you kind of explain to them how problem-solving card text conjunction works to the duelist and how those conjunctions would determine the effect's resolution. I think this is actually really clever. So you give them the tools to get to the conclusion without directly kind of telling them what would happen, because if you tell them directly what would happen, it almost feels like you're leading them on into kind of coaching. But if you give them the tools without answering the question, then they can solve it on their own, and therefore it is their own reasoning that led to the correct conclusion. This kind of makes a lot more sense, and no one gets any information revealed, so I like it. Next section, official media and fan created content. Okay, official media, that stuff is 90% of the time not gonna apply to YouTubers out there. It just isn't. This is for official media like Kotaku, IGN, GameSpot, these big media outlets. If they want to cover Yu-Gi-Oh events, I guess they have to register to get a media pass for their team, whatnot. There's a whole ton of stuff that they have to follow 90% of the time, unless they're a super big tuber with like a crew and like camera crew and everything. you're probably not gonna be falling under this category. I know there are some people that did get lucky and, you know, get the official media pass, but you have to go through so many rigorous review process that this is probably not gonna be for you. So what's this new section about fan created content? So for fan created content, yay, YouTubers can go all over the place in the venue. That's the rumor that I've been hearing, and you're gonna get kicked out. Okay, so at select tier 3 events, there could be a fan content area. This isn't something that's completely new. In 2019 Portland, I remember signing the forms. I remember a lot of the stuff that's actually written in this document. You have to sign a form to agree and abide by the fan content area requirement. You have to sign the code of conduct. I think that one is actually new. And there's also sign up for sessions to use the area. There's going to be a form available. You know, individual sessions may be available. And yeah, just there's a lot of FAQs. Just refer to it. You know, tables, backdrops, you know, limited amount of spaces. That's available in the content creator area of the fan content area. But here's the kicker. Attendees may only create their own content in the fan content area, and they may not use any other area of the event hall. That's right. You can't go around taking awesome B-roll, you know, recording other crazy fun stuff. Yeah, that's not allowed. You're going to get yourself kicked out really fast. So, you know, abide by these rules. And from personal experience, I've been given warnings and also been kicked out before. I'm not going to lie, because I didn't know any better, but now I know better, so I don't do it, and I don't want to make the judges kind of come up to me and say, hey Tom, you know better. All right, so yeah, and anything, we're also going to go over the code of conduct later on. Now into the section of duelist responsibilities. Okay, so this is just adding a little bit more clarity on a lot of things, starting off with communication. So what's changed in communication? Well, they mainly expanded on retracting legal moves, or should I say, you may not retract legal moves once you have committed to them. Committing a move includes but is not limited to verbally stating, announcing the action, placing a card on the field, removing your hand from a card once the physical action has been taken. Wow, there's a lot of things. So legal moves that you can't retract. There's one that I find that's very interesting. A duelist places, say, an Infernity Sage face up in attack position, and she cannot change her mind and put the monster back in their hand, even if she never took the card off of her hand. Basically, the gesture of putting the card onto the field will basically commit you into that move. All right, so think about your stuff before you do it. And I think it's actually kind of important here, because she did not take the card off of her hand, but because it got to a point where it's more or less revealed the information of that card's already in your hand. By not doing so, you're kind of revealing private information, and that's a big no-no. So, you know, they're keeping it consistent. Then there's the other section about retracting moves due to illegal action. This is stuff that usually comes with a procedural error minor, most of the case, sometimes major, who knows, but in the case of procedural error minors, these illegal actions must be retracted. The one that I really care about are actually the third and the fourth example, because this one elaborates more on stuff that how do you rewind a game state and how far you rewind a game state. Like, an illegal action must be retracted. Duelist A has a Skull Servant and an access code talker in the graveyard. He activates a monster reborn, targets the access code. B has no response. A summons out the monster after realizing, hey, you can't actually summon that because the access code was not properly summoned because it was negated via Solemn Warning. Since the target was illegal, the entire activation of Monster Reborn was illegal. Access code talkers returned to the graveyard. Monster Reborn should also be returned to Duelist A's hand, and Duelist A will not be forced to target a Skull Servant in the graveyard. This is actually pretty big, considering that, hey, you're actually reverting multiple parts in the game state, but they're going to revert back to the last point where both players can agree that the game state is proper and legal. That's the key thing here. And that's why the second example, in example 4, it kind of shows that, no, you don't reverse the game state all the way through, only to the point where both players agree is legal, because there is actually some repercussions if you actually over revert a game state. And so this fourth example here, A activates the graveyard effect of Miscellaneous Source, banishing itself to summon a level 1 dinosaur. B attempts to chain the call by the grave, targeting Miscellaneous Source, and banish and negate the effect. However, since Miscellaneous basically banishes itself for cost, it's no longer in the graveyard when Call by the Grave can be chained to, and therefore Call by the Grave will be returned face down since the target was illegal, and B will not be forced to target another monster in player A's graveyard. Notice that the game state only revert back to the part where Call by the Grave activated, because that was the last action that caused the illegal thing to happen in that chain. But note, that means the current game state is still in Miscellaneous Source as Chain Link 1, and it's on the activation of that Miscellaneous Source. So player B can still attempt to do something else, but that's kind of the point we're in. We're not reverting any further than that. We're not reverting past to the point where miscellaneous source has not even activated. We're still in that chain, so you can actually revert partial chains as well, and that's something I want to elaborate, because if you over revert the chain, you can get to a point where, oh, I guess before my opponent activates a miscellaneous source, I want to activate the Call by the Grave. See, that changes the game entirely, and therefore that doesn't make any sense. So I actually really like this example. It kind of highlights how far you revert in the game state. Continuing with player responsibilities, we have hygiene and appropriate attire. Guys, don't smell like a wet gym sock. And for the smelliest of people out there, typically you guys are immune to your own smell. That odor is very foul and very offensive to everyone around you. So you're gonna have to fix it before you get to continue play, and during that time you're still gonna get penalized for everything that is applicable. So you can get all your tardiness, you might lose your match because it took you more than 10 minutes. And for the appropriate attire, you're just required to dress appropriately for an event that may include children and family. Is that okay for children to see? If not, you're probably gonna get penalized for it. Subsection L, live stream events. This is a new section, and essentially they're just putting things on paper of things that they already do. So you can only use officially licensed game mat and sleeves, or unbranded game mats or sleeves. So in other words, they don't really want you to show any kind of branding, and if sleeves and game mats are provided, you have to use those. Typically the table already has like the zoning, so you won't really be using a mat in general. That's from what I've seen at most YCSs. And any tournament material, your counters, your tokens, your dice, everything is basically subjected to review before the start of the match. That part I already knew. Don't worry, you're not going to be playing on the same tournament timer. You have your own timer. Clothing, accessories, and every other item featuring logos or intellectual properties of other brands other than Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG cannot be live streamed. So that part is, I think, quite important to know. They're just trying to keep the streams free from advertising, more or less. And clothing branding from official tournament stores are acceptable, provided that it does not fall under items prohibited in unacceptable behavior. In other words, if you're wearing your team jersey and your team's basically sponsored by, OTS, whatever, usually those are okay. I'm guessing these are tournament jerseys because like a lot of players are going to have it, and this is kind of like a way to kind of allow that to happen. And you have to cooperate with tournament officials and live stream technicians. There's a lot of crew working at the live stream tables, from like the featured judges and the live stream crew. So say you get selected for a feature match, but then during the review session they find that you have a lot of stuff that goes against the policy and you can't fix it up in time. They're likely just going to go for a secondary feature match and basically choose them over you. And I want to add a little note to this, because a lot of players, they sign up for teams, and teams have sponsors, and they have like bonus incentives if they get to use a certain product on the stream because it feels like it's advertising for them, so they get like maybe like a monetary incentive. Well, this policy basically says that you're basically not going to be able to meet that incentive requirement because a lot of the branding stuff will not be able to be shown. So yeah, there's that. Now we're jumping into the next section, starting with the tournament information. This is the biggest change here: time limits. So Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG rounds are now 45 minutes at length for Tier 1 and Tier 2 events. So your regionals, your locals, they're all going to be at 45 minutes. This is a big change. A lot of people will not be playing into time as much, and maybe you can finally get into your battle phase. Regardless of what this is, it just matches the round length to the Tier 3 and Tier 4 events that are happening, and I think this is actually pretty good. And during single elimination playoff, the time limit may even increase at the head judge's discretion. This happens a lot at YCS, especially closer to top 8. They might add an additional 10 minutes, and usually finals they almost give it an hour to play. So that's just from what I've witnessed to have occurred. But time limits at Tier 1, Tier 2, 45 minutes now. It's great. We have a new timer, which is good. Into tournament play, the first section that was updated would be special assistant, to kind of give people more access to what they can request. And typically, if you want to request for special assistance, you should probably do it ahead of time so the TO can actually plan and account for it to try to meet your needs. Otherwise, if the TO has enough spacing, staffing, they are going to try to accommodate as much as possible, given that it doesn't negatively impact the event, doesn't go against local laws, and it's safe for everyone. So a duelist with mobility issues, they can request to have a static table, so they're always seated at the end tables with clear access to the aisles, or maybe they'll just have a special table. They might be even placed in the VIP area. A duelist with one arm can bring an assistant to hold and shuffle their deck, but the assistant cannot interfere with the match, okay? And a deaf duelist may request all communication to be done in writing. And a duelist with sensory issues may request a table apart from the rest of the tournament just to minimize noise and movement, whatever that may trigger something going on, only if space is available. So, these are some of the things that they have access to. For tournament registration and deck registration, what's really changed, they added a section mainly just covering online registration in general. But when it comes to like deck registration, note that you cannot change your deck list after you have submitted it, but there are 2 exceptions to this which will allow you to resubmit a deck list. One is that a forbidden or an unlimited list is changed after you submitted the deck list, because that information is of course basically unknown until it happens. And 2, new cards were released after you submitted your deck list, so you'll get 1 chance to resubmit your deck list. You still have to meet the deadline of submission for the event. But yeah, you cannot change your deck list for any other reason. Here is the biggest takeaway for this part. You may not drop from the event and re-register in an attempt to submit a new deck list. Don't do this. You're gonna get heavily penalized, and you're definitely gonna get caught. You might be wondering, oh, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I can tell you what's the worst that could happen. You're going to get caught and you're going to be disqualified from the event. I've asked head judges about this particular scenario before, and they were always leaning towards the side of UC cheating, because you're cheating against the policy. And by re-registering a new deck list, it's shown your intent, and that's kind of the direction you're going to go. So aside from just getting disqualified, more or less booted out of the event, you're also going to be facing potential chances of getting suspended from going into future events in it. And that's not looking too hot. Next subsection, we have sleeves. What's changed here? This is a huge section. I do recommend you guys to take a long read at this so you don't break the rules here. But more or less, they clarified that players or duelists cannot use sleeves that are too big, aka magic size sleeves or Pokemon size sleeves, because this would cause mark cards and you would be penalized as such. And duelists cannot use top loaders or hard cases because, again, mark cards. If you have tinting on your clear sleeve, not foiling, tinting on your clear sleeves, they have set a requirement on those tints so that it cannot affect the legibility, the readability of those cards. And they've also clarified that if you're going to be using double sleeving, one sleeve must be clear, whether it be the inner sleeve or the outer sleeve. One of those must be clear on both sides. And they've clarified that double sleeving means only up to 2 sleeves per card. So no more triple sleeving, all right? Next subsection, tournament materials. What's changed? They added a new material that we're allowed to have, zone markers to indicate block zones. So you don't need to use a dice anymore. You just have to use a card that's specifically marked with the giant X, which is good because this has been something that has been requested from the players. It helps us maintain the game state a lot better than having the notes where people don't check, and there's actually been miscommunications on that front, so this is just better. But this is also applied just to remind ourselves that head judges do not have the right to go against tournament policy, allowing or disallowing materials that are prohibited or allowed in the policy. So that's why this change has been made here. But again, yeah, you just get the additional zone markers that you can use now, which is also pretty good. Next is field layout. Nothing really changed here aside from just keeping the policy wording more consistent between documents, but I actually want to look into field layout a little bit more. In fact, this could have been its own video on field layout because of what's been listed on the head judge. The head judge cannot go against tournament policy. And after reading this, it's pretty clear here. The first point is you may not create your own layouts. You may, however, modify layouts if necessary to meet your physical needs, such as an injury, left-handedness, and you definitely cannot do that at a tier 4 event. So explain to me why this is legal. We have the main deck at the very front, and then that's a slanted horizontal. Behind that, there is the graveyard. Behind that, there's the banish pile. So how does that work? Why is that entire thing reversed on their side of the field? And I've heard many different reasons for it, but I would like to know, why is that like a necessity to meet a physical need? Yeah, explain to me that. I have heard some pretty decent reasons. I've heard some pretty terrible excuses. So from the decent reasoning would be like, oh, it's harder to knock over when you fan over your graveyard. That I kind of understand. If you have a 60 card deck and you need to fan out your graveyard for your opponent for them to see, I get it. But you also have an issue with a 60 card deck, or like with the deck being in the front, where you're obscuring the vision for your graveyard. It's not the easiest thing to see when you have a stack of cards in front of it, and it's just to kind of hide information from players. And I've heard people say that, oh, it's because of Magic the Gathering Pokemon, they play with the deck in the very front. Okay, I kind of get that, but that's a competitor game, so probably won't fly as a reasoning. And then I've also heard people say this, which is, oh, I do it so that, you know, my opponent has a harder time looking at my graveyard and my banish pile, and that way they can't really strategize as clearly. I'm like, dude, so are you just telling me you're just misrepresenting the game state and making it more difficult for people to see? Because, you know, your card should be in clear view of your opponent. So you guys let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about this particular field layout, whether or not we should be strict in enforcing against it or not, because I know at the feature table you're definitely not allowed to do that. For note taking, not too much have changed here except for a tonal shift. The policy used to state that you are not allowed to take notes at events except for the following things. Now it says note taking in official events are allowed in the following instance. So it's taking a more positive tone that yes, you're allowed to do it, but only for these things such as keeping track of life, mandatory effects, anything that would help maintain a legal game state, okay? And just don't disrupt the flow of the game. Essentially, that's more or less the change. And they kind of separated the section on what type of note-taking is allowed, what type of note-taking is not allowed. Public knowledge versus private knowledge. The key update here is, I think a lot of people thought that public knowledge meant, hey, I can ask for any information of any card text and you have to give it to me. Well, that's actually not true. And that's probably going to change out how a lot of people answer questions now. So if you don't answer anything that's public knowledge or liable public knowledge, that may result in a disqualification penalty, which is pretty significant. But, you know, the following information is considered public knowledge unless a card effect states otherwise. Number of cards in your hand, the number of cards in the duelist deck, that includes every part of the game, which is main deck, side deck, extra deck, the number and names of cards in the duelist's graveyard, and the names of cards that are banished face up. You can still count the number of cards that are banished face down, I believe, because that's also kind of just part of the game state. Both players' life points total, any notes taken, those are all public. If you take a note, you have to be able to show your opponent, all right? But here's the biggest change here, because you can't just ask for any arbitrary card, so the limitation is based off of the cards that were searched, set, summoned, destroyed, banished, activated, targeted by an effect during the current turn. Of course, any face-up card on the field would be considered as public knowledge, obviously. And information printed on any card that was searched, set, summoned, you know, everything that has affected the field targeted by an effect during the current turn, that's public. So in other words, if it's past the current turn, those things now become private. So which cards that were searched, set, summoned, destroyed, activated, targeted by an effect during the previous turn, I don't have to tell you anything here. And information that's printed on a card that was searched, set, summoned, you know, banished, destroyed, activated, and targeted by an effect during the previous turn, again, something that I don't have to answer. Yes, there is a typo there. I did ask about it, and you know, I should interpret that as the previous term, and you know, that's been judged as correct, so we're gonna go with that. That's probably gonna get updated very soon. And if you intentionally reveal something that is private knowledge, that's gonna probably result in a disqualification. And let me explain why. It's like, say you take out cards out of your deck and you purposely show like a certain card that may mislead your opponent into thinking that you're playing a certain deck. Yeah, that's a big no-go. So, you know, that's kind of continuing on with what we already know. So this whole change is probably going to affect people when it comes to knowing stuff about your opponent's extra deck. If you don't understand how your opponent's extra deck is going to work, they don't really have to tell you anything until that monster's on the field. So, you know, tough luck if you don't study up your matchup. So, yeah. I guess that's going to be a little bit of a change for some players. Next part on hand deck verification. Mainly this part is to give examples on what's appropriate for the judge to verify, what is not appropriate for the judge to verify, and to kind of give examples on that. Remember, duelists should not perform this task on their own because it's going to cause revealed private information. It's going to be a very, very big problem. So, you know, just because someone's playing a card that is considered a side deck card, such as, you know, anti-spell fragments, for instance, it doesn't warrant a deck verification. But there are certain things that do lead into deck verification because it provides you with supporting evidence, such as, you know, if someone plays a limited card and they play a super rare version of a card, and then suddenly they're playing a different rarity of that same card, but that's a limited card, how do they have two different rarities? That is something that is very sus, and you definitely can ask for a judge to verify on that. And yeah, if they find 2 copies of a limited card, then that's going to be a big problem. Especially for one of the players, and they can't just say they didn't know because they submitted the deck list. So there are certain things that you can definitely look upon there, and there are many other reasons where you can say that you can get the verification, such as, oh, they added a card and then you decide to mind crush them. They say they don't have it, but you know they have it and you haven't seen that card in a while. That, you know, justifies it as well, because you have supporting evidence towards the claim that, hey, something's improper. Okay. Next updated part would be in the controlled loop section, where, you know, if you get to put into a loop, you just tell people how many times you do a loop, so that's how you do it to prevent slow play and stuff like that. But there's also like, oh, what about a die roll? I'm sure this is added because of Morphtronic Telephone. You have to roll a die, but if the net gain of said card does not affect the loop from continuing, you just do the loop thing once, you roll the die once, and there's no need to keep rolling the die repeatedly. This is to help prevent slow playing and stalling from performing pointless action, as the point of the loop is to gain something out of the loop at the end of the day. And rolling the die, whether or not you rolled a 1 or a 6 or whatever number it is, if it has no significance to the loop, you just don't do anymore. So yeah, there's no point in doing that, and that's considered as a quote-unquote net gain part of this thing. Updates on conceding a match. Did you guys know that there are policy on that? But typically you're not restricted from doing so. But if you're at a really high level tournament, you know, tier 4 and above, or maybe you're at a feature match or finals, let's just say conceding a match usually have additional steps and requirements to do so, and maybe you need to get permission. If you're not sure, ask a judge. And the other thing that they added in is that you may not ask your opponent to concede to you, even if you don't offer compensation. Well, you're not bribing them, but you also can't ask them to scoop it up, buddy, you're done. Yeah, you can't do that. They have to come to that conclusion themselves. And typically, if they're good enough, they'll probably do it because they realize they can't win. And that will save them some time, and they get to kind of play more time into the next game. Next, we have bribery and collusion. They added a section regarding prize splitting. So a prize split is not a bribery, okay? And this cannot happen at tier 3 events. However, if top cut duelists all agree to do so, and there's no, you know, additional incentives or coercion involved, yeah, and it's up to the tournament organizer's discretion to allow for, you know, prize splitting. Okay, cool. So reporting match results. If you finish your match, you know, before the timer is called, well, you have up until 5 minutes after the timer hits 0 to submit your result. If you don't, then you will receive a game loss penalty. It's going to be a PE major, and it's going to be a game loss at the start of the next round for the person who's responsible for submitting the match result. What does that mean? Don't walk around with your match slip. Just go ahead and submit it, because you're holding back the tournament. Updates on tiebreakers. Additional tiebreaker will make it less likely for a duelist to end on identical tiebreakers for ties for the same standing. Okay, that's cool. And then we're going into tournament infractions. So unsporting conduct update more or less just states that even if you're not at an event, you can still get penalized for said unsporting conduct. So just because you're not there doesn't mean that you get away scot-free. And there's the new section on code of conduct, which we'll cover in a second. And then there's card legality. There's no reason for me to go into it. You guys can read that part yourself. And the section about marked cards, all that's been really updated here is that if you can't replace the marked cards, you know, in due time, 10 minutes, then you will need to be dropped from the tournament and replace those cards. Now, once you have replaced those cards, you can still re-enroll into the tournament. You just have to notify the scorekeeper to do so. If you don't re-enroll or tell the scorekeeper to re-enroll, you just won't be paired for any more rounds. In other words, you would actually be dropped from the tournament. So this code of conduct that has a page on the Yu-Gi-Oh website now applies to both physical and digital events. There's even a section regarding like your naming convention, okay? So regarding behavior, well, first of all, just don't harass, bully, threaten people with harm, or cause discomfort to people, including staff, players, any contracted staff at Konami events such as judges and, you know, event staff, okay? The second thing, don't engage or encourage any sort of discriminatory, be disrespectful, prejudicial, hateful, physically dangerous, illegal, or otherwise objectionable conduct determined by Konami in its sole discretion. Don't discriminate people based off of race, color, religion, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, age, disability, veteran status. Any of that will not be tolerated. Anything that's determined as hate speech is definitely not allowed. Any kind of slurs that are not allowed. Then there's also communications clearly insulting others, individuality or group, that's also not allowed. No stalking, bullying, harassing, again, don't do that kind of stuff. Impersonating someone in any way is not allowed. Do not post or distribute obscene links. Basically, just don't be stupid. And then don't post, distribute anything that's related to political, religious content, because this is, again, supposed to be like a welcome space. And here's another pretty cool one. Falsely reporting another player with the sole intent to restricting their gameplay is also unacceptable and will result in consequences discussed below. Yeah, in other words, don't falsify your reports, because that can get you in a lot of trouble as well. Personal information, you should not post the personal information of other people. Your own information, you should probably just hide this stuff. This is kind of all private stuff. And also don't impersonate someone else by using their screen name or attempting to self-represent someone else based off information, including fellow users, Konami staff. Naming conventions, don't do anything offensive with your name. Don't be stupid. Don't try to, use symbols to kind of hide it and bypass filters. Don't do anything don't do anything stupid here. Don't cheat, bribe, scam, do anything related to fraud. Don't do any dangerous activity. And consequences could mean that you lose your right to participate. You could get suspended. You can do all sorts of stuff, and you can even lose your account and all sorts of currency that's also tied to those accounts. So yeah, just don't be stupid. Honestly, I recommend you guys to give it a read. My read was like a quick skim, and that's it. That's everything you need to know about the policy update. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, my version of the breakdown. If there's anything that you guys want to know, leave it down in the comment section. I'll see if I can answer it, but I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions. Who knows? We'll see how we go. That's all I got for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.